So I'm a web scientist. I'm a founder of Flying Binary. We're a web science company that changes the world with data. And we're transforming organizations, cities and nations to deliver Tim Berners-Lee's web science vision of it's for everyone. For us as a company and for the world in general, what we've been talking about today is the transformational change that IoT brings. And what I wanted to do was actually illustrate some of the work that we've done that takes us beyond the traditional big data approaches and puts a new trust and privacy model on the table. And it's very much picking up on the issues that Frederick raised. So we orchestrated these two things together, so I really apologise for the fact that we weren't able to deliver the two talks together. But first of all, I just want to tell you a little bit about the company. This is the juggle angle. No. So I've just completed just over 3.5 years in the UK's Cabinet Office as an independent ministerial advisor, and our technology provided the evidence base for the open data agenda. We supply all our smart city and Internet of Things platforms via a new initiative from Majesty's Government, which is called the G-Cloud programme, and I will talk about that later. And for the upgrades for these cloud services, they're awarded on Monday. No fears on that, should all be fine. They're upgraded every 6 months. So we've had, this will be our 7th award under this European framework for the UK. And in terms of aggressive timescales and aggressive change, we're certainly in that from a UK point of view and from a company point of view. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. This is Brian Solis's fabulous work he's done. This is Prism 4.0. Not that Prism is what my team always asked me to say. This is a conversation prism that was released in 2013. This is a digital ethnography of the social networks. And for us as web scientists, this was our first public signal of the change that we're talking about now. There was no single voice when he released this research, no single audience, no single story. And that signaled for us the end of Web 2.0. And that was about then standing up capability that we call the Web Observatory. And I'll talk a little bit about the evidence base around that. But if you're looking at the social web in general, you'll get an inaccurate picture without some of the things that I'm talking about today. And we've concentrated on building our IoT services on two things: the societal impact of the change and the citizens' curation of that change. So Tim Berners-Lee in London on the 8th of October last year articulated this publicly, which we live streamed, and some of you may have caught that, where we will actually be able to leverage that power of the human connection for the benefit of the citizens themselves, where the communications internally and externally for organisations are actually increasingly important as we pull that connected society together. Jacques mentioned book number 3. This is book number 4, which I'll talk about in a minute, and book number 5's just been commissioned. So this is an evolving landscape from a European point of view as much as it is from a UK point of view. So, one of the things I want to get over to you is the new audience that we're talking about here. When we talk about citizens, we talk about us here. But actually the new audience, predominantly on the web, is Generation Y, the millennials, the 1982 generation. But we mustn't forget the generation that follows them. And that Web3 audience are a very different set of people than those of us from Generation X who've largely spoken today, because the openness in their communications and the way in which they want to build their society, if you follow the hashtag #TheWebWeWant, will give you some intro into that. It means that it's not just going to be an auditory change, the way we talked about it today. It's going to be a visual change, but more to the point, it's going to be an interactive change where people actually curate it. So at Flying Binary, we co-created the data journalism industry with The Guardian when we put the first story live, which was the human cost of 10 years of wars in Afghanistan. Within the first 2 hours, we had over 30 million people interact with that story across the world, and we knew we were actually onto something. And we shortly be, if you keep an eye on the Flying Binary tweet stream, we're shortly going to be launching the live visualization that's on the cover of this book, because our G-Cloud services that are awarded on Monday actually are the IoT capability for it. Okay. The thing about this as a capability is it's actually using the social web, the social machine that is Twitter, to create a trust network. And we've launched this book as a primer for our PhD courses as journalists, because we're in a situation now where the world has changed for us forever, and the work that we've done needs to actually build on the people rather than the tech. So we're moving our focus away from that. And one way of illustrating that is this visualization is part of our Web3 collateral. But the previous sets of technology we had, if we were putting something live on the web, we would probably on the screen have something like 100,000 data points. This is 100 million. We're building beyond this to be time series. So when you talk web scale and you talk about citizens and you talk about interactions, that's the level of which we're having to build in order to accommodate the change that's going on. And the next version of our cloud platforms will do that. So I want to just talk about the G-Cloud framework, because in a European setting it's actually quite important. In 2011, Her Majesty's government decided a brand new policy direction for the digital government in the UK. Brave was not the word on it, it was more than brave. But this was a cloud-first policy, because if anyone was going to leverage the change that cloud would bring, and therefore IoT beyond it, then it was going to be the government. Started with the NIST definitions, which as a cloud industry you'd expect, and created a cloud service catalogue, which is 39,000 organisations connected to UK government and the government itself can buy from, with what we as suppliers call an Amazon-style experience. They click, there's an automatic order, and it lands in our inboxes. So for us, for cloud, it's about public offerings, it's about hybrid, public cloud offerings, hybrid, private cloud offerings, all interoperable, all accredited by CSG, who are the security and cybersecurity arm of the G-Cloud program in this marketplace. The one cloud service we haven't got on here yet, which is the one that IoT brings in, is community. And that's the one where, from a citizen point of view, and the connections from a government point of view, that will be an important step. We've not got it up there because we're not at that space yet. But certainly we have it built, but it's not currently offered on there. I think one of the key things to say from a European point of view, there's no reliance on safe harbour for anything other than the public cloud. Everything else is safe harbour free, and that's been really important to us. And we were accredited as a company by CSG in the summer of this year in order to recognise that change that we've made. We've built everything up from ground up, from tin up, quite honestly, and the security levels are built in, sometimes at the tin level, sometimes at the network layer, but it's actually a secured ring in order to meet the requirements of the UK government. A key aspect of what we've delivered, though, is part of that, because we're web scientists, is to be able to enable that societal change, to be able to have a citizen perspective and a new trust and privacy model for that data when it's in the cloud. So that's why I say it's beyond big data. So as a company, we pivoted in September 2014 in advance of this change that goes live on Monday, and we switched all of our data work to engineering principles, because from a web scale point of view, that's the only way to build. We don't use data scientists as key resources now. They're data engineers. We're obviously using data science techniques, but we're only building these Web3 services now at the company, and so that's why I say beyond big data approaches. And the Internet of Things Award that we won in January of this year was in recognition of those data platforms, which were deployed other places than in the UK in order to test them. And the reason we got that award was to actually put the system at the heart of those platforms and to understand how that could be a new trust and privacy model. But more than that, it was how can the citizen influence the direction of travel? And that's particularly key, and the way we've done a lot of our use cases on this next area. Now, this is where Frederick and I talked, and he said it would be great to show how it got done in your instance. So how did you do what you've talked about? What does it look like? So the arena I've chose to talk about is standards, not the standards we've just had a discussion about. Technical standards, well, that will be a debate for some time. These are strategic standards in the standards landscape terminology. Standards are stacked in terms of how you do them. This is the very top level, not the bottom level we're talking about today. But in the UK, we have our 188 smart cities, and each has articulated its own vision for what this looks like as they move towards the Internet of Things reality. And the British Standards Institute, of which I'm a member, have launched over the last 18 months what we call a family of standards. You can all have a copy. They're free to download from the British Standards Institute site. Just type in smart cities into the search engine. It will give you the stack, and they're there for free. And they're now being fast-tracked to ISO standards. I got the go-ahead in Beijing a couple of weeks ago for that actually to be built out and to start to connect the joint technical committee work in ISO with the IoT and the smart city piece. And from a BSI point of view, I'm the technical author of the new British standard in this arena, which is something called PAS, Publicly Available Specification, PAS 183, and that's the data interoperability and sharing between our smart cities. So data capability, national capability, with data as a critical infrastructure for the UK and how that will work. And I'm due to deliver that in autumn of next year, but we're already well underway with that standard, and we start our review and our base drafts in January. So watch the space on that one. And so for us in the UK, what we've chosen to do is actually get round some of the debate, have a different debate, move the landscape on differently, and use smart cities as a key use case for IoT. And the reason for that is not because of smart. That's not actually the reason why we've chosen to do this. It's actually to move beyond smart, to look at sustainable, resilient cities. Because internationally, that's something that links us all, not just in Europe, but from a UK point of view, it's equally important. So when I talk about the citizen, I'm actually talking about participation. This is not about engagement. This is about how can citizens actively co-create. And if you intend to build for smart cities, ready for that Internet of Things, enablement and Web3, this is the biggest opportunity for any sector. And we've had a lot of sector discussions today, and they're all valid. But smart cities actually is a blend of all of this. As data specialists, it's not an area we've looked at before, so this required us to look at a different way of building this and a different evidence base for the curation of not just the smart cities, but the Internet of Things ecosystems that are all part of it. And it's a very complex area, so I thought what I'd do is I showcase some of our policy work, because I knew that we would have a great policy debate here, because that's something that George and Jacqui always make sure that we do. If we get the policy right downstream, we're going to be that much closer. So I'm going to look at a couple of key use cases for the IoT work. So this is, since the Snowden revelations, which we as journalists have obviously had to redo what we do as our work, we needed to develop at Flying Binary this data platform in order to actually understand from a web observatory point of view what on earth was going on out there. And actually we've commercialized that now, and that's available from G-Cloud from Monday. But we've called it Web Intelligence, and that's really how we use the technology to connect the citizens in order to move on the work we're doing. From our metrics point of view, from a smart cities viewpoint, about 8% of the people involved with those ecosystems can actually have this conversation without this sort of technology. But we're looking at actually making that 80%. I mean, we're obviously working beyond 80%, but to actually have a co-creation debate about it. So what we do is we deploy this technology to any city anywhere in the world, and we ask what I call the wicked questions, the things that only citizens can answer, the voices that we should hear. So what I wanted to show you is this is part of our policy research for education in the UK, which we've delivered via the G-Cloud framework, so it has all the security and everything else. And this has allowed us to put 600 educational specialists working in this area, moving towards smart education in our cities, which will be different for each city. So, I've got a slide missing there. Oh no, I get to press it in another order. It's there, yeah. So, another initiative that I want to talk about, again, a policy piece. We're called technology suppliers to this creation of a space which the NHS in England has had to rethink from a policy point of view its relationship with citizens. And we created this space we call NHS Citizen, which is a public space where citizens actually get actively involved in the decision-making we do from a health policy point of view. We use web science to create a new evidence base around this for and on behalf of citizens. And it related to the changes we need to make to our health service. Like most health services, this consumption model we have is just not sustainable. We need to be able to accommodate the new audience I've already talked about. We need to look at self-care, we need to look at prevention, and actually start to have a different mindset about what we need from health and give citizens some control and say and certainly direction of travel for the way in which we provide our health care. And from a point of view of what that meant with citizens, so the Web Observatory asked the wicked question. In our health case in the UK, it's the National Health Service. Who does the NHS delight and who does it disappoint and why? And in terms of trying to understand that sort of question across the social web and bring citizen intelligence to bear on answering those questions, need to understand the bias that exists, but more to the points in Snowden, we have to understand the disintegration in those social streams and what that means. And the answers were generally positive, but in the UK, the NHS and health is a binary answer almost. So we had a huge amount of neutral in there. Neutral is not something that our health service and its debate ever gives rise to. So we had to understand that. But interestingly, I mean, whether you're into data or not, you'll see that huge spike. And that's probably one of the first things the NHS wants to know. What is that spike? That spike was a social web celebrating the NHS's 66th birthday. Not something the NHS itself was doing, but actually what was underneath all of that, that neutral sentiment and the neutral conversations and the neutral insight we were getting was there were actually 169 advocacy networks actually going on that helped us understand the real questions that needed to be answered. And those advocacy networks are now helping to decide the health policy we need. But it's from a web science point of view, whilst all this is great, not everybody's online. So yes, the web is going to transform everything, all the things we've heard today, but approximately 18% of our citizens are not actually engaged here. So one of the things we had to understand is that map actually shows us where our resident cities are, but what about the rest? Because that doesn't cover the landscape. So that actually allowed us to bring that digitally excluded agenda on board, and we've actually got some really key changes in health policy to be able to, in individual cities, individual patients, groups and advocacies, to develop their own views of health policy, but to participate directly in their delivery. We've heard today many times, and I'd concur with that, IoT is a reality. It's transformational on many sectors. Our IoT award that we won this year wasn't for the work in the UK, because largely we're not doing it there. But in Asia and Scandinavia and some of Europe, in the construction industry, advanced manufacturing and materials handling, it's been a huge opportunity. And you'll see many more of those sorts of stories emerging. But we've evidenced, from our point of view, something very interesting. There's at least a ×2 multiplier for every pound, dollar, euro invested. But our latest project, if I'd have been speaking 2 weeks ago, I said there's a 40 times multiplier, but we've just evidenced a 60 times multiplier. Now that gets really interesting, because one of the things that's going on here is what's the funding model for some of these changes? We've heard about all the silos and all the churn and all the foot race to be first and all the rest of it, but actually where are the investment models around this? So that's a question I thought I should answer that myself, so I am. So I've been in talks with Hollywood investors, because the thing that I didn't understand was, if I can show a $3 return on a $1 investment, then I can get a film made. If I can show a 60 times return on a $1 investment, I can pretty much get them to look at IoT and what it might bring. So for our next piece of work, we're going to take investment from Hollywood to actually do a game-changing piece of work in the health space. And there'll be less films made, and it will be my fault. I'm quite happy to own that one. So going back to the citizen piece, the societal piece, with the disintegration of the streams, the move to Web3, all the things I've just talked about, the under 25 demographic, what I term Gen Z, are actually, they're no longer resonant on the web in the way that they were. And they've disengaged from those social platforms. And we saw that literally move so very swiftly from the Snowden revelations. So if we want to include them in this going forward, which absolutely we must, because it's their world and probably they're going to have more say than we ever will, then we had to find a way to do that. And one of the voices that's generally missing is young men, which from a health point of view is quite important, because we have a phenomenon in the UK, I have no idea whether it exists anywhere else, it'd be good if anybody does know, called the invisible patient. They're young men, ages 25 to 35, that turn up in what we call palliative care, end-of-life care, first contact with our health service. What is that? This piece of work was actually done on an education basis, but because of the fact that we work in the health space, we were able to combine that evidence base. And we contacted these young men, and from the ages of 14, that it resonated with them, this work, in what they're calling their trusted space, which, given all the debates we've had today, that's like an odd term, I would think. But for them, their trusted space is their PlayStation 4, because they're who they are online. They don't see themselves as somebody that disconnects and connects. That's who they are. It's me. I might have many persona, but it's still me. And so we were able to have this new trust and privacy dialogue with them in this trusted space. And we've developed something we call VPI, volunteered personal information, and we've got many more things that we'll launch into our cloud services where we'll bake this in. But this is now, as of Monday, will be baked into this web intelligence platform. And interestingly, on this particular piece of work that we did with the education space, it was a complete crossover with health. So we actually found and uncovered the evidence base, which was very similar to young women who had eating disorders. But these weren't young men with eating disorders. But it actually had allowed us to look at how we might move from that consumption model to a prevention and self-care model for this cohort, the 25s and unders. So expect to hear much more about that. Now, one of the things that I think that we'll move on to next, and we've had these discussions, we had something called the Comprehensive Spending Review in the UK yesterday, which means we decided what money we were going to put where, and the Chancellor has signalled that Internet of Things is a key area. But we will look at this in a wider policy context rather than just looking at baking health or education into our cities. And one of the interesting things that come up as a result of this work, I mean, this map won't mean anything to you, and even if it did, I couldn't explain it because I wouldn't be allowed. But it's not about just our cities, it's about the gaps. What are the gaps? The urban places, the coastal settings. Education policy provision needs a different answer for those. And that has been contextualised with citizens giving us feedback as to why. And so now what we're looking at is common strategies, core policies is the best way I have it. That's not an official title, but it's just the way I'm thinking of it. Core policy that supports our smart cities as we lead to our Internet of Things. Community is the key to the Internet of Things world in the UK. And this VPI model that has come out of this work, this volunteered personal information, is going to be baked in as our new trust and privacy model. And the data standards that we're developing in the UK will underpin this as well. And what we see for this new path that I'm developing is citizens will drive the value of their data as part of this connected agenda. From an organisational viewpoint, because of course it's a true ecosystem, a smart city, public, private, third sector collaboration, actually data is an asset in that sense, can actually be used as an exhaust to improve the lives and the direction of a city. But equally, some of my work across the world in the last few months has been valuing that data. What value does it have? And sticking it on a balance sheet. So this whole thing is accelerating towards something very important. And somebody asked me yesterday, I did a lecture to the young engineers, cohorts, PhDs who are due to graduate this year. And they said to me, give us an example. What does it look like? You must know you're an evidence sort. And I think when I think back to my early work in Cabinet Office, we articulated the open data agenda for the G8, that we'd now call the G7. And that agenda has gone from that work in Cabinet Office in June 2012 to today, where we have the G68, a third of the world's population covered by that initiative, that transparency initiative, which recently in Mexico City, the G16 signed up to. So what does this look like, Jacqui? My answer to my engineering PhD yesterday was, it looks like transparency. Is it a multiplier of times 60? I have no idea, but it's big. So I'd agree that it has that impact. Last one. So one version of the truth is what we're after in our Internet of Things world. How do we all look at the same evidence base? So this G-Cloud platform allowed us to look at the policy question. What is the impact on education policy provision for the 20 million additional people that are going to cross London when Crossrail, the new transport infrastructure, opens? And the impact is large, but at least we're doing it from an evidence-based point of view. But this is the same platform that Crossrail engineers look at what they call the buried assets in Smart City London. So I can lift this lid, and underneath it I can see every shaft, every lift, every track that runs under London in order to have that infrastructure do on that. So whilst data might be the new oil, what I would say is we're creating products and services and value, co-creating with a citizen to be able to manage the raw resource into something useful and of value. And that's why I say it'll allow you to move beyond big data into what is in the UK, the first implementation of IoT, which is smart cities. And they're the future hubs of our government. And not only will it be new trust and privacy models for the citizen, it'll allow us to embrace the IoT world. And we'll realise IoT from a UK point of view by taking that approach. So thank you for listening.